Welcome to the Genesis Bible Study. And today we are looking at Genesis 1, verses 1 through chapter 2, verse 4a. And you may be going, that's a weird way to break down. Why not just do Genesis 1 and then Genesis 2? It's actually because the creation story we find first is Genesis 1:1 through 2:4a, and that's because of the way that the chapters and the verses get broken down throughout the years. And that begins with, we see Stephen Langton, the Archbishop of Canterbury. He was a professor at the University of Paris in the 13th century. He breaks down the books into chapters, and then we see the evolution of that with a guy named Robert Stephanus, a Parisian printer, who in 1551 breaks down the New Testament, those chapters now into verses. And sometimes there's not a great understanding of the Hebrew or the Greek. And so there's a misunderstanding of where things start and stop, because the original Greek and Hebrew text, those texts have no spaces. They don't have punctuation. There aren't paragraph divisions, and so you have to be very, very aware and understanding of the languages to be able to understand where they begin to break down. And so that is how we get to today's of following chapter 1 through chapter 2, 4a, because that begins and ends the first creation story. And what's interesting about this first creation story is that it is written from the priestly tradition, and it's actually written most likely at the end of Babylonian exile or right after Babylonian exile. So it puts a dating there of around 550 to 450 BCE. And that dating, Genesis 1, this first creation story, is actually younger than Genesis 2, which the second creation story, which we will talk about in the next episode. And so to actually recognize that is kind of interesting. And for us to, as we are reading through this story or looking at it, of the priestly tradition, what does the priestly tradition try to do? Well, the priestly tradition in general, not just for this story, but other writings throughout the biblical text, what they're trying to do is they're writing from a place of thinking in a priestly way, which means how do we order our life? They are concerned about sacrifices and rituals and festival days and ritual purity. They're trying to write from a place of they want to ensure the survival of the people because they are concerned with the correct way of living. They want everything structured neatly, which we find in the creation story of Genesis 1. Everything is nice and in order. And one of the goals that the priestly tradition has is to help the Israelites who are in exile deal with the insecurities of exile, to respond to the loss of their liberty, the separation, by providing some certainty. So there's chaos, and then there is order brought out of that chaos. And so it just kind of helps to know where the priestly tradition is writing from. Another thing that they're trying to convey is that they're trying to convey the meaning of things that are really beyond what is perceptible to the senses, because they're trying to answer the big cosmic questions that arise from human existence, which we see in Genesis 1. And the opening words of Genesis 1 are really trying to help the people who are exiled in Babylon and are like, did God abandon us? What happened to God? It's trying to bring assurance that God is with them and that their God, the God of the Jews, is different than the God or the gods of the Babylonians. The Jews have one God, and that God is very different from all the Babylonian gods. And so there's a sense of hope here, a sense of hope out of the priestly tradition. And as we read through Genesis 1, that's where it's supposed to be. A hope that God is with us and how God is with us, even in the big questions of life. And when we're thinking about creation stories, not just Genesis 1, we have multiple creation stories throughout the biblical text. We have another one in Genesis 2, which, like I said, we'll get to next time. But we also have creation stories like John 1 in the New Testament. And so that's just kind of neat to see the different creation stories throughout the text and what it's highlighting about who God is, what are the big questions those stories are trying to answer. And when we think about different stories, it's important for us to recognize that in Judaism and Christianity, we aren't the only ones with creation stories that you can find, especially those that seem to have similarities to the creation stories found in Genesis. There is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is a Babylonian epic, and it's the world's oldest epic poem from 1750 BCE. We get the Babylonian Atrahasis myth, which is 17th century BCE, and it tells the beginnings of humanity, the problems arising after creation, the near destruction of humanity by a flood, which we will get to certain aspects of the Genesis account. So you can see where other people, they've got big questions, things have happened, they're trying to answer those questions. And then the Enuma Elish, which is 1100 BCE, is part of the Babylonian New Year festival, and it tells the birth of the gods and the creation of humankind in a well-ordered universe. And so it's just kind of interesting to be aware that others have creation stories, that other religions do, that other cultures do, and to recognize what makes Genesis 1 a little bit different. And so some interesting things about Genesis 1 is that it's reporting about things that exist before God's creative activity. And when we're reading through, the Hebrew word that can be translated as sky or heavens, we also have the Hebrew word Adam that can be translated as humanity or man. And when we're reading through it, to note the elements that are called good, and then the things that are created that are blessed, because there are differences, such as what the earth produces is good, but not blessed. And then to take note of the first person plural language that will get said in the later part where humanity is being created, because it says, let us make humanity. Now, some have interpreted this as there is a divine council around the supreme deity of God. Others have interpreted this as the Trinity. This is the first sign of Creator, Redeemer, Sustainer, or in the more traditional sense, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So just to recognize we get a plural in there. And then something else is that humans and animals actually share the breath of life. And so as a result of that, they get to have the same source of food. So it's fascinating when we slow down to read through certain things. And then to take note also of another thing used is a literary technique of pairings between days. So between days 1 and 4, days 2 and 5, and days 3 and 6. And the first pairing focuses on light. The second pairing involves water, and the final pairing highlights land. So for the priestly tradition, this is all about order, bringing that order out of chaos and making deep connections that everything in creation is connected to God and is connected somehow in some way to one another. And some of the things that this text is trying to convey is that Genesis 1 describes the world from a perspective of a naked eye. Like this is what is seen, what we can observe if we go outside. And that God is creating order in the midst of chaos. And then God's also creating creatures, creating plants and seeds that are given then the ability to propagate. So to continue creating life in a new way. The way that humans are able to create is different from the way God creates, but is connected. that humans can still create just a little bit differently because we are created in the image of God. So we begin to see connections here and understandings of how God is with us, of the beauty of that creation and what that allows others. So trying to understand a deeper meaning to life and connections with something greater than ourselves. The purpose of Genesis 1 is it's really trying to get the answers about the why, the ultimate questions facing humanity. Because we all have questions and we all have deep questions. We have questions that are much bigger than ourselves. And so Genesis 1 is trying to give an understanding, trying to provide a way of looking at and answer some of those really big questions we may have. And when thinking about all of those, I would like to take a minute to read Genesis 1 through 2:4a, and I'm going to read it out of the Common English Bible Translation. But feel free to read along in whatever you want, or just to listen and take in some of this, and to recognize that as we read through it, it's really great to question it and go, wait a minute, did it really say, or why did it say? And I'm happy to answer those questions if you want to put those questions in the comments, whether that's on Facebook or YouTube or even on the podcast. So beginning in Genesis 1:1 in the Common English Bible Translation. When God began to create the heavens and the earth was without shape or form. It was dark over the deep sea, and God's wind swept over the waters. God said, "Let there be light." And so light appeared. God saw how good the light was. God separated the light from the darkness. God named the light day and the darkness night. There was evening and there was morning, the first day. God said, "Let there be a dome in the middle of the waters to separate the waters from each other." God made the dome and separated the waters from the waters above the dome, and it happened in that way. God named the dome sky. There was evening and there was morning, the second day. God said, "Let the waters under the sky come together into one place so that the dry land can appear." And that's what happened. God named the dry land earth, and he named the gathered waters seas. God saw how good it was. God said, "Let the earth grow, plant life, plants yielding seeds and fruit trees bearing fruit with seeds inside it, each according to its own kind throughout the earth." And that's what happened. The earth produced plant life, plants yielding seeds, each according to its kind, and trees bearing fruit with seeds inside it, each according to its kind. God saw how good it was. There was evening and there was morning, the third day. God said, "Let there be lights in the dome of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will mark events, sacred seasons, days, and years. They will be lights in the dome of the sky to shine on the earth." And that's what happened. God made the stars and two great lights, the larger light to rule over the day and the smaller light to rule over the night. God put them in the dome of the sky to shine on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. God saw how good it was. There was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. God said, "Let the waters swarm with living things, and let birds fly above the earth up in the dome of the sky." God created the great sea animals and all the tiny living things that swarm in the waters, each according to its kind, and all the winged birds, each according to its kind. God saw how good it was. Then God blessed them. "Be fertile and multiply and fill the waters and the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." There was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. God said, "Let the earth produce every kind of living thing, livestock, crawling things, and wildlife." And that's what happened. God made every kind of wildlife, every kind of livestock, and every kind of creature that crawls on the ground. God saw how good it was. Then God said, "Let us make humanity in our image, to resemble us, so that they may take charge of the fish of the sea and the birds of the sky, the livestock and all the earth, and all the crawling things on earth." God created humanity in God's own image. In the divine image, God created them. Male and female, God created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fertile and multiply, fill the earth and master it. Take charge of the fish of the sea, the birds in the sky, and everything crawling on the ground. Then God said, I now give to you all the plants on the earth that yield seeds and all the trees whose fruit produces its seeds within it. These will be your food. To all the wildlife, to all the birds in the sky, and to everything crawling on the ground, to everything that breathes, I give all the green grasses for food. And that's what happened. God saw everything he had made. It was supremely good. There was evening and there was morning the sixth day. The heavens and the earth and all who live in them were completed. On the sixth day, God completed all the work that he had done, and on the seventh day, God rested from all the work that he had done. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all the work of creation. This is the account of the heavens and the earth when they were created. So a story about how life is kind of ordered, that as there is chaos, God helps create order. God recognizes good things. All that God creates is good. And then we have how God blesses. And to begin to think about that in our lives, of how God creates us in God's image, of how we are part of bringing the good and we are blessed out of the chaos of life. Because sometimes life feels a little chaotic. Maybe we feel like life's a little chaotic right now and could use a little bit of, all right, how is God blessing us today? How do we experience God's goodness that is all around us in everything today? Because God is constantly with us. And to recognize and to remember that even as God creates, on the seventh day, God rests. That there is a sense of being able to rest from all that we create, all of the good that we can do in this world. That sometimes we need to take a breath. And my hope is that you will find time to find a little rest. Because sometimes when the chaos is swirling, rest can be the most helpful. As we've gone through the scripture, maybe you have more questions. Maybe you're like, ooh, I wish you would talk more about. So please let me know that. And may you experience God's blessings this day. Have a good one.